Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We're going to give our attendees just a few minutes to get logged in, but thanks so much for joining us and being here with us this evening. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Hollins Happy Hour. Thanks so much for being here with us. We're going to give a few minutes for all of our attendees to get logged in, but thanks so much to everyone for being here. We're going to get started in just another minute. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Happy Giving Tuesday. A quick thank you to those of you who've made your gifts today. I know my colleagues in development are busy processing and counting gifts, and we're so grateful to everyone for their support. We're so delighted that you're here this evening. For those of you who have not met face-to-face, I'm Lauren Walker, class of '04 and the Director of Alumni Relations. I will see several of you guys are already using the chat feature. Thanks so much. If you haven't already, go in and send a message to all panelists and attendees with your name and your class year so that we can have an interactive session and see who's here with us this evening. We're also going to have an opportunity for you all to ask questions that I will relay to Balli after her reading. So if you have a question throughout the evening, please use the Q&A box and we will get to those a little bit later in our session. I think I speak for all of us when we say how excited we are to have Balli Jaswal with us this evening. It is morning for her, and we're so grateful to you, Balli, for getting up early and being with us. Balli is an award-winning author of 4 books. Her short fiction and nonfiction writing have appeared in Cosmopolitan Magazine, the New York Times, and Harper's Bazaar, just to name a few. She's traveled widely to appear in international writers' festivals, to conduct workshops and lectures on creative writing, the power of storytelling, global citizenship, and social justice advocacy through literature. We are so delighted this evening, and welcome, Balli. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Lauren. It's such a pleasure to be virtually at Hollins if I can't be there. It's always like my haven or my happy place. So it's kind of nice to be sort of there or be in the presence of lots of Hollins people at least. That's really
I was
nice.
going to say, if nothing else, you can feel the love and the Hollins energy on the call for sure.
Yeah, that'll do.
Well, I'd love to know, and I'm sure many of our attendees tonight are curious how you even heard of Hollins and decided to attend Hollins.
Yeah, it was sort of by accident. A very happy accident. I went to an international school in the Philippines, and everyone at that school, a lot of students at that school were US citizens who intended to go back to the US for college. So their parents were living in the Philippines for work. And I kind of got swept up, I think, in all of that, and really when it came time to deciding where to go to university, I said, okay, I want to go to America as well. The school was also very American. It was an American school. So I think I was quite influenced by the education and the fact that all my teachers were American. And my parents right away just went, no way. Or it wasn't so much that I was going far away. It was that, you're not going to go that far away just to study creative writing was the message that I got from them, or to study, liberal arts. So I had to get a scholarship, and Hollins was one of few universities that had really generous scholarships and financial aid for international students. So there weren't many at the time. I don't know if there are more now, but sort of narrowed it down. And I think Hollins came to mind because there was another student who was in the same situation as me from a previous year. And she had applied and gotten into Hollins. She ended up going somewhere else that gave her a full ride. I think she went to Franklin and Marshall. But you know, I sort of kept my ears pricked for any opportunities that would get me there. And so that's how I got to Hollins. It was kind of a cool coincidence.
It sounds like a fabulous journey, and you've
Yeah.
had quite some experiences since then. So, to kind of bookend where you are today, will you tell us about your post Hollins journey and what adventures and travels you went on after that?
Mhm. Yeah, well, if I could condense it, right after Hollins, I enrolled in an MFA program at George Mason University. So the intention was to continue studying creative writing. I got ill in the first year, and so that plan was derailed because I went back home to Singapore after being hospitalized to recover, with the intention of coming back to the US and possibly coming back to George Mason to do my MFA. But then while I was in Singapore, I got a teaching job, and I realized how nice it was to actually have a 9 to 5 life and then write in the evenings. Like there's something really nice about bringing home a paycheck, about not being a starving artist, and about developing a career and an identity that didn't have anything to do or had, you know, less to do with writing. Just so there were just different dimensions to my life rather than just being kind of stuck in a book all the time, and not eating. So while I was teaching, I applied for a fellowship in England to write my next novel, or write my first novel. I got that fellowship. I went to England for a year, came back to Singapore and worked for a while as a journalist. Decided I wanted to continue teaching, so I went to Australia to get my postgraduate diploma in teaching. Ended up staying in Australia for 5 or 6 years. And then it's my son. Oh. I went to Istanbul, Turkey for 1 year to teach at an international school. And within that time, while I was teaching in Australia, I had published my first novel, Inheritance. Started writing erotic stories for Punjabi widows. I had another novel that was kind of in a drawer that was actually my honors thesis at Hollins. It's called Sugar Bread. And I had written it, didn't really know what to do with it when it was done because it wasn't really done. It was kind of a first try at a novel. So that kind of sat there for a while. And then when by the end of my year in Istanbul, I had gotten a book deal for erotic stories for Punjabi widows. The manuscript, I had revised Sugar Bread and submitted that to a competition where it was shortlisted. And all these things, it seemed as if I'd written like 3 novels in a very short time, but it was actually a couple of years. And then we moved back to Singapore in 2016. So I've been working and writing here since then.
Wow, a whirlwind. And it does sort of seem that way. And I know we have several aspiring writers I've seen in the chat. So I think that's super encouraging to know that, you know, while everything was kind of bookshelved one after the other, you had lots of things going at different
Yeah.
times, which is really cool, and probably juggling a lot.
Yeah, yeah. It seems that I do my best writing when I'm a little bit stressed and busy.
No, I
So
can
I guess that's where that comes from. Yeah, I think a little bit of pressure is good because when I do have kind of long expanses of time to just write, the day kind of loses shape a little bit, and I get a bit complacent. So I need a little bit of just stuff going on, yeah, so that I'm kind of sneaking away to write. I'm carving out time to write, and that makes the writing more focused.
I like it. Do you have other writing rituals?
um Rituals. So I can't write if I'm hungry. So if it's like close to lunchtime and I'm starting to feel a little hungry, I find that I find it very difficult to concentrate on what's on the screen. I mean, I can't do much when I'm hungry. Maybe that's just my personality. I don't know if it's just writing. But another thing that I find essential to writing is walking. So I take a number of breaks while I'm writing, and I go for long walks throughout the day. just to I don't know, it does something. It kind of reassembles the thoughts in my mind, helps me get away physically and mentally from the page. And sometimes I know that the thoughts just kind of all it gets overwhelming. They all kind of get backed up. You know, you have so many things that you want to say, and then there are all these kind of doubts, and there are all these, but what about this other thing that you thought you would write? All of that kind of starts to feel a bit overwhelming, and a walk really kind of resettles those things, and helps me realize, it gives me perspective in terms of like what's important to focus on, and what I can do without for the moment. So that's, yeah, that's a big thing for me.
So feed you and walk you.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, I should put that sign outside my door, my office door.
The basic things
Every
of
2 hours.
I love it though. Well, and I think as women, both of those things speak to taking care of yourself. Um,
Yeah,
and as women,
absolutely.
sometimes we're so focused on other things or tackling that to-do list that
Hmm.
it sounds like just the simple act of taking a few minutes for yourself to clear your head and to get back to your process really helps. That's
Yeah,
awesome. And
absolutely. And I happen to live in a very walkable city, so that also really, really helps. So like I last year I was writing in a co-working space that was like a 20-minute bus ride away from my place, but I would walk home, and it was a really nice walk. It was through a really cute neighborhood, and then there's this nice kind of cycling path. And I just really look forward to it, like at the end of every day. It was just a really, really nice way to commute, and it was also just a nice way to debrief a little bit. So that's fortunate.
that's awesome. Well, on your post Holland's whirlwind, I know
Mhm.
you lived in Singapore, Japan,
Mhm.
Russia, the United States. How did
Mhm.
those expat experiences change your
Mhm.
approach to telling a story and to writing?
Mm. Um, I think it gave me the sense of always being an outsider, and always being kind of observing things, and kind of building bridges of my own. So there were lots of things that I had to understand through narrative. I think like a lot of things aren't explained to you when you move to a new country, especially back then, like especially in the 80s and 90s. Like we didn't really, like these days, I think that expat kids, when they move around, schools are much better about transitions. But when I was growing up, it's kind of like you're just kind of plonked into a new school, and it was sink or swim, and you just kind of had to deal with, with being the new kid and learning a whole new system and a whole new culture. Um, so a lot of things I did, to kind of to settle in, had to do with telling myself a story about what was around me, and putting myself in that story. And also just, yeah, I think having to explain myself a lot as well. So having to explain like, this is where I'm from, but no, I live here. And to do that constantly. So it's a very fraught question if you ask me where I'm from. It's like, well, do you have a minute? Because I have a story for you. And I think that probably came from that. And also I think I've just always had an innate desire to tell stories. I genuinely love stories and reading. So I think all of those factors kind of combined, to make me a writer. There's something also really nice about having the space to tell your story without interruptions. So, like, and I always felt kind of voiceless as a kid. I think I always felt like I didn't have enough time to quite explain my context or who I was. I felt like it was just really brushed over. And if I could write, then I could, present this whole world to people. I could present this whole world to the world and say, look, this is the in-between world that I live in.
Wow. So your storytelling, it sounded like, began at quite a young age.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I loved to read. I think most writers will say that, and I just found that I found that novels and stories also, because they felt like a safe space for me. And growing up, there was a lot of uncertainty. Like we never knew kind of, how we knew how long we would be in a place, but we kind of never knew the unwritten rules of a place. And um, if you read a story, there was always an arc that was kind of comforting. There was always this kind of ideal, and there was always that there was conflict, but it always got resolved. And I think I found that very comforting to be in those worlds, because there was so much uncertainty in real life. So I think that going into stories really, it helped with the escapism and helped me understand myself as well.
That's awesome. I love it. I could listen to a story. I love to read as well and could listen to a story all day. So it's so neat hearing that. And how do you answer the question, where is home to you?
Yeah, I usually ask people if they have a minute. It's complicated. Um, I mean, I usually, the short answer is usually Singapore, because my parents are from here, and I was born here, and I think I spent about half of my life here. I think I spent probably most of my life here at this point. And so yeah, I answer with that. But that's also complicated when I go to other countries, because Singapore is 85% Chinese ethnically, and it's only kind of like 10, less than 10, I think 7% Indian, and I'm North Indian, so it's, I mean, an even smaller minority within a minority. So people automatically go, no, you're not. And actually, when I was in school, I know that like now at least is a bit more, um, there's a bit more understanding or knowledge about kind of diversity within countries. But when I was growing up, like my teachers would tell me, oh, no, you're not from there. You're from India. Of course you're from India. Oh, you just went to Singapore for a holiday. No, you're not. Like they thought I just kind of had this fantasy of being from Singapore. So I've had to kind of explain that, and I have to explain that sometimes in Singapore as well. Like there are Singaporeans who don't believe that I'm from Singapore. Because of ethnicity, but also because of the way I speak and the way, I've taken from so many different cultures, that I probably seem like an outsider to them as well. So it's kind of it's a question that doesn't really have a satisfying answer to a lot of people, and I think that's what inspires me to write a lot of the time, because I just think, well, I've got all these different identities, and there's a story to that. There's a story to that. Those many in between places that I call myself, that I consider home, and that makes a very fascinating story. So that's where I kind of channel all of that, all of those unanswered things.
I love it. It's great. And that's sounds like the perfect answer. And it sounds like you've well perfected it in dealing with all those
I've
follow-up
had to.
questions, which is part of life.
Mm.
Anything, Molly, that you learned at Hollins that has really stuck with you or helped you along this journey?
Gosh, most things. I would say most of what I learned about being a writer. Yeah, I learned at Hollins. It's a kind of place where every time I set foot at Hollins, I wanted to write. Like every time, if I went away for Christmas break or something, I would read. Like over the summers, I would read. But when I was at Hollins, I wanted to write. There's something about, I don't know if it's the air or it's just the environment of support that you have there. There's something about the place that just makes you want to construct and create worlds of your own. Um, I would say, yeah, I think that was my first encounter as well with workshops and with being in creative writing, in a creative writing class at all. Like I didn't really have that before. And I learned a lot about, I guess I opened myself up to a lot of new authors that I hadn't heard of, having grown up mostly in Asia. And I learned about how, I think this is something quite valuable. I learned that being that in a workshop or in any kind of setting where you're exchanging work with others, it's not so much the writing that you're going to do or the reflecting that you're going to do on your own work that's going to improve you as a writer, as it is the articulating of what needs improvement in somebody else's work. So reading other works in progress actually sharpens your inner critic or that inner voice about your own work. And so it was almost like my practice was kind of secondary to this, this process of identifying, what needed improving or what needed to make a story stronger. And that was something that was emphasized a lot, I think, at Hollins. And I think, I think it really helped. It's something I teach students today as well, when I do teach. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. And have you found that community with your students or when you, as you're still writing?
Yeah. I have I teach at a liberal arts college here in Singapore. So, and that's really exciting as well, because when I was looking for universities and looking for creative writing programs, there was nothing here. And then in the last kind of decade, things have shifted dramatically here, mostly because all the kids like me who grew up here and didn't and were creative, and were into writing and the arts, didn't have an outlet and didn't have a place to be writers or artists, and we all left. At the same time, in the 90s, and in the 90s, it really was like that in Singapore. Unfortunately, it was all about math and science. It was all about building the nation, being economically strong, being the best at these kind of big ticket disciplines. So the arts was really just kind of shoved under a rug. It just wasn't interesting, and wasn't valued. But then so many of us left, I think, that our government realized that was a problem and lured us back.
Yeah.
And also realized they couldn't be globally competitive. Like you can't be a globally competitive city, or country, if you don't have the arts, if all you have is people who love to make money and love and love technology. So they poured lots and lots of funding into the arts. So suddenly it was really strange. After Hollins, I came back to Singapore, and all of a sudden the degree that was in demand was a creative writing degree. Like, it was so strange.
Wow.
Like, job ads were like, must have creative writing degree, because that became kind of the thing, that it became kind of the buzzword was creativity. It's uncomfortable because they did do it for economic reasons. So they did say, okay, we love the arts now because we want to look good. But it works for us artists here. Like, we're very well funded here. We have we have a liberal arts college here, it's Yale University's Southeast Asia campus. So so the students get quite a lot of kind of international exposure, and it's changed quite dramatically. So I managed to kind of find the thing that I was looking for in Hollins. I didn't just have to bottle that up and keep it with me, which I did. I also managed to now find it in my surroundings. And I have a really robust writing community here. It's wonderful. It's really unexpected and wonderful.
Oh, that's fabulous. What a great gift. Thank you so
Mm.
much for sharing.
Mhm.
In a previous interviews, you mentioned that you didn't know where your novel, The Unlikely Adventures
Mm.
of the Shergill Sisters, was headed when you first started.
Mhm.
Could you talk to us a little about how you
Mhm.
develop those characters and how your plot unfolds or comes to life as you write?
Sure. I actually started writing The Unlikely Adventures of the Shergill Sisters in Roanoke. I don't know if you know that.
Oh,
But yeah, in 2016, when I was moving from Istanbul back to Singapore, I had about 6 weeks of like the summer, where I was just kind of in between places and could go anywhere. And I wanted to come back to Holland. I wanted to take the opportunity to go back to a place that I maybe wouldn't be able to return to so easily once I settled back in Singapore. Um, so I have a host family in Roanoke, from my time at Hollins, that I'm very close to. I think they're tuning in. Hi, Lucy, if you're there. um,
Lucy and Steve.
and yeah, I wrote. I remember, like, I wrote to Lucy and I said, I've just been contracted to write this novel. It's a part of a 2-book deal. I'd really love to come and see you as well, and I'd love to come to Roanoke to write it. And she's like, within 24 hours, she was like, your room is ready.
Best, isn't she?
Yeah, she really is.
Well, our
And
community is the best.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And actually a couple days before that, I ended up seeing a lot of Holland's people, because I also spent a week in Atlanta with my best friend Courtney, who's a Holland's graduate from 2005, and saw a number of Holland's people in New York as well. So that was really cool. That was like a nice little mini reunion. But yeah, no, I didn't know where the story was going, and I guess because I had to kind of come up with it pretty quickly. The way it happened was that I my agent sold erotic stories for Punjabi widows, and then got back to me and said they want to offer you a 2-book deal, which I wasn't going to turn down. I was really excited, and she said, do you have any other stories in mind? And I had a very, very vague idea about Three Sisters, some sort of road trip novel, India, England, like just very, very vague. Usually I need a couple months to let those things settle and to kind of be cultivated a little bit. Um, and with this, it was really like, okay, but within 24 hours, we need a synopsis, and we need, we need you to kind of, yeah, to confirm this. So I came up with a very hasty synopsis, and I said it's subject to change, but this is what I'm thinking. And then suddenly I was on this treadmill where I had now I had to write this novel, and it was really, really difficult. I would say it was the hardest novel that I've had to write because of that, because I wasn't sure. I was never sure where it was going. I wasn't as confident, because I had kind of come up with it, for the publishers at the time. Of course, I made it my own eventually. But the three different characters, I wanted them to represent, different women on that spectrum between tradition and modernity. That I think a lot of South Asian women struggle with, especially women in the diaspora. So women who have grown up in England or the United States or Singapore, who come from these kind of, traditional cultures, but also have these aspects of modern life that they appreciate and that are part of their identities. For me, what I find quite unsatisfying in narratives about the diaspora is when, tradition and modernity are kind of pitted against each other. Like there's this very traditional figure and this very modern person, and they just kind of fight. And I just don't think that anyone's like that. I think that it's a spectrum, and we all kind of travel, up and down the spectrum depending on the situation, depending on age, depending on our relationships. It all changes. So I was really fascinated by that, and fascinated about where each woman was on the spectrum and how they clashed, because they're sisters, how they clashed because of those expectations. So that to me was kind of the driving force of the novel.
Wow. Would you, before we go to questions from our audience, read a little from the book,
Sure.
please?
Yeah. So I'm going to read from the beginning of the novel, because a lot of it is it's pretty dialogue heavy, and it's also very context specific. They move a lot. There's lots of characters. So I thought I'd give you an idea of what happens, fairly early in the novel. So the premise of the novel is that a dying woman, Sita Shergill, gives her three daughters a task of going to India, to fulfill her last rites. Her daughters don't get along with each other. They're estranged from each other. So this is kind of her way of tricking them into hanging out with each other and finding peace with each other. So I'm just reading the beginning where she starts writing the letter. My dearest daughters, she began. She stopped and frowned. When had she ever addressed her children as dears? She crossed out the line and began again. To Rajni, Jasmine, and Sharina. There, a command for their attention. She used to stand at the foot of the stairs and shout all three names, even if she only wanted one of them to come down. She could always find something for the other two to do once they arrived. It only worked for a while, then Jasmine started calling back, which one of us specifically? To Rajni, Jasmine, and Sharina. By now I am dead. It is just as well, because I've had enough of this ghastly life, all of this working and suffering and trying to take care of myself for no bloody reason. Please enjoy your health while you have it, because once your body betrays you, no comforts in the world will make up for your loss. No, she couldn't leave them with that. It was too honest. If these were her last words, they'd never forgive her. She folded the sheet and set it on her side table, weighing it down with a pen, and then she closed her eyes. How did she want to be remembered? She had been a wife, a mother, a widow, and a grandmother. Sikh funerals didn't include eulogies, so her daughters would be spared the task of scraping together a list of her meager achievements. On some days, she thought she knew which of her daughters would remember her least kindly, and on better days, she assured herself that not all of them would at least agree that she had tried her very best. Sita pressed the button to call for the nurse again. It took a while this time, but eventually the rail-thin girl with the tattoos and half her head shaved arrived. She was not as friendly as the Jamaican nurse who sometimes squeezed Sita's hand and said, "You rest now." But she smiled when Sita asked her, "How old are you?" "I'm 27, she replied. There were zigzag patterns shaved into the sides of this girl's scalp. Sita wondered what men found this sort of thing attractive. "Have you ever been to India?" she asked. "No," the nurse said, a bit regretfully, which pleased Sita. "If your mother asked you to do something for her, no matter what it was, would you do it?" she asked. The nurse slid Sita's table down the bed so she could tug at the edge of the blanket, which was bunched up by her feet. Her fingers grazed the knuckles of Sita's toes. "Of course I would," she said. "Now, is there something you need? Because..." "What's your religion?" Sita asked. Her question was met with narrowed eyes. "I do believe that's a very personal question to ask." Sita frowned. There was a reason she liked the Jamaican nurse better. She wore a thin gold cross that hung just beneath the V-neck of her scrubs. "Oh Lord," she wheezed quietly, stretching her back at the end of a long shift. "Can you hand me my pen and paper, please?" Sita asked. As the girl reached into the drawer next to the bed, Sita's heart leaped into her throat. "Not there!" "It's right there on the table," Sita snapped, pointing at the table, now out of her reach. Although the nurse was unlikely to pluck Sita's jewelry pouch from where it was nestled between a prayer book and her mobile phone charger, Sita had lived long enough to know that you could never be too careful. The girl moved the table back and then left, probably to grumble to the other nurses that they were right. Oh, Mrs. Shergill needed to cark it already. Last week, Rajni had stormed into the nurses' station and told them off for leaving, Sita shivering during a particularly agonizing episode. "I don't care if she's already got a blanket. Get her another one," Rajni nearly shouted, making Sita want to weep with gratitude and also chastise her daughter for making a scene. The pain was inching into her body now, and she could sense that it was going to be a bad day. Her daughters would visit this afternoon, hopefully all three of them, since Rajni had called Sharina and informed her to fly over at once when it appeared that Sita's remaining days were down to single digits. She had to write this letter before the strength leached out of her. To Rajni, Jasmine, and Sharina, if you remember correctly, when I was first diagnosed with cancer, I wanted to go to India to do a pilgrimage to honor the principles of our great gurus. You and the doctors convinced me that this was a bad idea because my health was already so fragile, but I think it would have enriched my spirit, if not my physical condition. I'm attaching a list of places that I would like you to visit on my behalf after I'm gone. They're in Delhi, Amritsar, and beyond. The whole journey will take a week. You should go together and do all the tasks as instructed. Seva, to serve others and preserve your humility. A ritual Sarova bath for cleansing and protecting your soul from ailments. And a trek to the high peaks of spirituality to feel appreciation for that body which carries you in this life. I would also like my ashes to be scattered in India. There are also some places I'd like you to visit because I won't have the chance to do so. Simple pleasures, like watching the sunrise at India Gate and sharing a humble dinner together. I will outline the itinerary in more detail on the next page. Please do this for me. It will be a way of completing my journey in this world and continuing yours. Love, your mother, Sita Kaur Shergill. I'll stop there.
Wonderful. You've got my attention. So thank you. Great. There is something really special as well about hearing the author read the book, you know, the way you intended it. And, you know, that's really neat, really lovely. Thank you. Well, I know Hollins alumni are never shy about asking questions. So I would love anyone who has a question, you can put it in the chat box. You can put it in the Q&A. I see one already. We've touched on this a little, but the best writing advice you've ever received, or the best writing advice, your favorite to tell your students?
Ooh. Oh man. I feel like I could think of something if I had a bit of time. So the best writing advice that I've ever received, I think probably the idea of getting it down first and then getting it right. And I don't know who it was who actually articulated this for me, or if it's something that just kind of, it came across in different ways. But I think we get really bogged down by our inner critic, and we get really silenced by that inner voice that says, oh no, you're not doing it right, or no, not that sentence, or and our confidence. I know that when I write, my confidence really takes a hit, especially when I'm writing a first draft. I think with writing Sugargirl Sisters in particular, because I was kind of on this deadline, and on this treadmill, so to speak, I just kind of kept myself to a word count every day. I didn't always meet it. In fact, I probably met it less often than not. But I didn't know what the story was, and so I just needed to get stuff down first, and then I could shape it later. And it was different from the way that I had worked with my previous novels, where I would write a little bit, then go back, then write a little bit more, and then go back and keep kind of fiddling with it and changing it. Thanks to this novel, I actually now have that approach of, write a first draft. Doesn't matter if it has inconsistencies, doesn't matter if some of it feels ridiculous, because you write those paragraphs that just go that aren't making much sense, but there's always a little bit, there's always a jewel hidden in there. There's always some clue, something from your unconscious or your subconscious gets dropped onto the page that you can use, and that you can use later. So that's, yeah, I would say that's really valuable advice, and I tell my students that all the time, because they do get really frustrated with their early attempts, and I have to say, well, that's okay, just get it down first. You just bring it to workshops, so just get it down first and then get it right. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And we have a perfect follow-up question. One of our attendees is also interested in any writing advice that you have not taken.
Ooh. I guess for me, it was more, I don't know if it was writing advice so much, or like publishing advice. But I definitely was sometimes kind of nudged towards explaining more, or kind of playing up to exotic stereotypes sometimes. And I'd say, okay, yes, there was an aspect of principle to it. Like I said, no, I'm not going to do that, because I don't like it when books do that. And I shouldn't have to, put footnotes in a book, or whatever it is. Like, I think that readers are intelligent enough as well to understand from context, and I'll try to do that. So I think that was a principled stand, but also publishing changed. In the last couple of years, publishing has really been much more diverse, much more open, to narratives that aren't centered on the US or the British experience. So they're actually centered in another culture, and you don't have kind of this idea of, well, that's normal, and these are all the things that are outside of it, even though the story takes place, centrally in that outside. So I would say, yeah, there've been just a few times that kind of old-fashioned editors have wanted me to change things, or deliberately kind of play up certain stereotypes that I have said no to. But I was lucky as well that there were other places to go with my work, and perhaps that wasn't the case earlier for writers.
Oh, that's awesome. Our next question is, it sounds like from your reading that perhaps you are on a spiritual path. Does your writing speak from the heart and speak to any of the paths that you're on?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a spiritual path, just a learning path. I think, yeah, I think my writing certainly reflects the ways in which I've grown, and the different kind of roles that I've taken on in life, and the different responsibilities. I think, like, the way I wrote and the way I read as well in my 20s is quite different from the way that I write and read now. So I think it does reflect my growing experiences, and the sorts of stories that I want to tell, and the sorts of stories that I want to read. Yeah.
That's awesome. So we have an alumna who is just giving a great shout out. Thank you for your books. I'm a first gen American, and your books tap into the internal conflict of being attached to two homes. I just love them.
Oh, thank you.
That's always so wonderful when you can find a book that just speaks to you in that way. So I'm just so delighted. And to the member of this community, that's super cool.
Yeah.
Another question, when you said you struggled with the second book, do you think that pressure made for a better result? Would you prefer that pressure again, or do you like to go at your own speed?
Yeah, I remember saying I'll never do this again. I'll never write to a deadline like this again. I found that pressure really challenging. I also happened to like the sort of 18 months that I had to write this book. I also happened to move countries, happened to enroll in a PhD program that for which it was a creative writing sorry PhD program. So I was kind of getting college credit for writing a novel, which was cool, and it was for this novel. So I was kind of killing two birds with one stone. But there was that to deal with. I got pregnant, I gave birth, I continued with the PhD, we moved homes. There was just a lot going on in that time. So despite the fact that I was kind of being a full-time writer, I really wasn't, because life happens, and other stuff happens. And that was enormously stressful, and it really took a whole team to kind of pull me together. Like my editors had a bigger hand in this novel than they've probably had in other work, because of that, because I really just needed people to drag me across the finishing line, especially after giving birth. um, uh, and I remember being very, very drained at the end of writing this novel. Like I actually thought I was going to quit writing. I just said, well, I think I've given it all that I can. I don't think that I can write anymore. I think I've got other priorities now, and I just don't want. I think my tank was just empty. And then of course, like a month passed, or a month or two passed, and I was talking to my husband one day, and I said, I have an idea for this story. And I started talking, and I just kind of, it was supposed to be like a one sentence thing, but of course I gave him a whole synopsis, and he went, I think you're writing another novel.
Yay!
Yeah. So then my agent happened to get in touch with me that week to say, are you thinking about writing anything else? And I said, well, I have this idea. And she said, well, let's do this thing then. Let's tell HarperCollins, and let's, sign a contract. And this time around I had to say, well, I don't mind signing a contract so much for this, because I actually have the story kind of forming in my mind already. So I feel a bit more confident going into it. But I asked for it to be more liberal and more understanding, than the previous one was, where it really was about just, she's got one book, now she's got another book. Just keep putting them on the shelves. So yeah, so I guess I got right back on that treadmill. But with a bit more confidence, and a bit more kind of a sense that I was doing something for myself, like it was my novel. Whereas Sugargill Sisters felt at the beginning a lot like a publisher's novel that then I had to make my own, and I did, but it took a while to get there. Yeah.
That is actually exactly our next question. Any other projects in the works that, Balli, you
Yeah.
talk about? That's so exciting, though, and I could just feel the
Yeah.
crowd going wild that there's another.
Yeah, well, this is such a funny, it's such a funny day to ask this, because I just submitted the draft of my new novel to my publishers last night. Yeah, so this is a celebration. This is very, it's not water in this. I know it's early, but it's been a very long year. Yeah, I've written a novel about three Filipina domestic workers in Singapore, who kind of band together to prove the innocence of another domestic worker who's been accused of murder. So it's a dark comedy. It's kind of in a similar vein to erotic stories for Punjabi widows, where you've got these women who are silenced, who are pushing forward and trying to find answers for something, and being empowered. It's based on an experience that I had. I lived between Singapore and the Philippines in the 90s, in my teens, and there actually was a murder here. So a Filipina domestic worker murdered her employer, and I think her employer's child, or was accused of doing so. And all we heard, because at that time all we had here was state-run media, so all we heard was that it definitely was an outsider. It definitely was a domestic worker. No doubt about that. We need to teach them a lesson, and she was executed. And then I moved to the Philippines, where it was a completely different story, and then the news covered it very, very differently. And I had the privilege of kind of learning about alternative narratives, to something that I had always just been told about that community and about the dangers of that community. So something that really stuck with me, because I remember the moment where I just kind of went, oh, what I've been told isn't necessarily true. So kind of put that same situation in the era of smartphones where it's a lot harder to keep people from getting information.
Wow, sounds fabulous. And we have several cheers from our audience. So cheers to you, Balli. Does one of your characters particularly resonate with you? Do you have a favorite?
Hmm. Yeah, it's like choosing between your children, isn't it? You don't want to say it. Um, I would say, I think going back to my early novels, so the novel that I wrote for my honors thesis at Hollins that ended up being published, Sugar Bread, um, Pin, that the character in that novel, that the novel is more autobiographical, I think, than anything else that I've written. So Pin, the main character, is a 10-year-old girl, and she was kind of modeled after myself and the insights that I had as a kid, but she's also a little bit braver than me. And she also has the benefit of hindsight because I'm the author writing her
Yeah.
again. So I found it really, I really, of all the things that I've written, I really enjoyed writing Sugar Bread. I loved going back to the world of my childhood and moving things around so that I was triumphant. And that I had a nice arc. And so I think Pin's character is very much based on me. And in Singapore, that's a very popular novel here in Singapore. And I get that question a lot from people. Are you Pin?
Oh, that's cool. What do you do, Bali, to refill your creative tank?
Hmm. A lot of times it takes stepping away from the work that I'm doing. So if I go into writing and I feel like the sentences just aren't coming to me, or I just feel drained when looking at the work, I usually just step away from it. I don't work on it for a little while. Again, that's harder when you're on a deadline, so you don't have that option. And you also need a little bit of the pressure to go back into it. Otherwise, you know that's why there's so many half-written novels out there because we just go, oh, I'm blocked, and then we walk away and we don't come back. I read, like I said, I take lots of long walks. I try to consume art and literature just to refill my tank. So I go to the National Gallery here, or I go to readings, or just whatever, just to kind of start to feel inspired again, but also kind of taking it in without necessarily having the pressure of producing. And it comes back.
Yeah, that's great. Well, so we have a fun comment to share. Tim Conway used to sign himself into the mental hospital after each book he finished. He didn't have babies, working on a PhD, and move houses at the same time. So you, Bali, have learned great resilience that you share. So
Wow. Yeah. I just wouldn't have time to book myself into anything. Although I have to say I do one thing that is amazing for my mental health. And I was doing it before the pandemic, so I want to know that I'm ahead of the curve is staycations. So booking myself into a nice hotel in Singapore, usually in a neighborhood that I can never afford to live in. So it's like, okay, I'll just rent this life for one evening. Usually like you can find good deals on a weeknight, especially after having a kid. That's what saved me. Like looking forward to that Wednesday night in a hotel in nice kind of fresh sheets and overlooking the city and being able to walk, to a nice breakfast place or whatever. It does so much for my creativity and my mental. It's like going into a blank slate. So I guess that's my version of that. And now it's become very popular here in Singapore to do staycations because we can't, our borders are still closed because of the pandemic. So we're not allowed to travel outside. So everyone's just, especially at Christmas, I think our government gave us these vouchers. Like we all got vouchers to use for staycations or tourist things
oh,
to try to
wow.
stimulate the economy. So the whole point though is to try to get away from people, and all the hotels are full of my neighbors, which I don't want to see. So.
Oh, that's
But
priceless.
that really helps me. That you can have that. You can take that. You can
That's
try that too.
fabulous. How do you manage the mood of your novels from creating it to maintaining it?
Mm. Um, I think that sometimes comes into the revision process. Like I think the first kind of the first stages of the draft have to do with developing the characters, and trying as much as I can to develop that arc. The mood, yeah, it does kind of it does sometimes have inconsistencies as I'm writing that early draft, but that's one of those things that if you take a little bit of distance from the novel, you can kind of spot where those inconsistencies are. So if I like return to the draft and start reading it, then that's where I kind of see where the mood has dropped or the mood has changed. Sometimes it's really on a sentence level. And often I need someone else to kind of point that out to me. So I need my editors to point those things out to me, because that's quite challenging. Yeah.
For sure. Well, as we start to wrap up our evening, I would think I would love to hear, and I'm guessing some of our audience, what you're reading now, or any favorites
Oh,
you'd like to share.
yeah. Let me just look at my bookcase. I always have a few things going at once. So I've started reading this one, which is Flights by Olga Tokarczuk, I think. I forget where she's from actually, but she's it's a translation, and it's probably the best. Something called Flights in a Time When You Can't Fly and Can't Travel. Yeah, it's all these different reflections, all these little vignettes about traveling, and she writes. Some of them are kind of stories, some of them are experiences that she's had, and it's really lovely escapism, and also just feeling like you're just in all these different people's lives and in different worlds. It's yeah, I've just started reading that last night, so that was it's been good. It's been good so far. Yeah.
Fun to spit. Any other favorites?
Let me see. What's behind me? Yeah, let me try to point out something. Oh, this one was good. This one was pretty good. It's called Breast and Eggs.
Oh,
By Mieko Kawakami. It's a Japanese novel, and it's translated into English. And it's about that narrative. I'm really interested in narratives about places. In the narratives that we haven't heard about places. So I think a lot of narratives that come out of Japan often focus on, the wealth and the kind of the orderly society. It's quite patriarchal, and this novel focuses on women kind of in the margins, like single mothers, and a woman who's a single mother by choice, and a woman who wants a boob job. And it's like that stuff that that the women don't really talk about in other narratives. It kind of shines a light on them. So that's been that's a good one.
wow. Well, Balli, thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself this evening. It just has been a real pleasure to spend time with you. I know everyone has enjoyed your novels and are anxiously awaiting your next one. So on behalf of all of us, your Hollins fan club continues to cheer you on, and
Thank
we're so
you.
grateful for you to getting up this morning. Congrats on submitting the new book, and put a link. We do have one more upcoming happy hour this month. President Mary Dana Hinton is going to be with Ann Compton. So if you haven't had a chance to meet our new president, please log in and join us. It's next week on December 10th. But Balli, thank you again so much. And thanks to everyone for being here. Well, take care, stay safe, and be well.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. It was lovely.